we want to get into one of his greatest possessions, one of his greatest gifts, anyway, to us, to the world, is this book. And the book that you see right here, which is called You Are Not a Nigger. Now, we're going to get a little bit into this book, the information. But before we go into we are willing to share today, I would like to mention other books that he has produced. And so you just get a gist of, the works of Yahweh ben Yahweh. So these are some other books or other works that he has published. The Widow's Son, Raised from Poverty to Riches. Yahweh ben Yahweh Mathematics, Designed to Rule the World Forever. Yahweh ben Yahweh, Divine Dietary Laws for Hebrew Israelites in the World, in the Garden, The Sentence of Death, Our True History, the World's Best Kept Secret, which is Who Are You? Divine Cookbook, Recipes from Heaven, Volume 1, Divine Cookbook, Recipes from Heaven, Volume 2, Divine Cookbook, Recipes from Heaven, The Removal of Wall, the Divine Mark of Protection, the Manifestation of the Name L.I.V.E, Adam's 6,000 Years Deep Sleep, An Introduction to Hebrew, the English or the Language of God, L.I.V.E, Yahweh Yahweh, the Blessed and Only Potentate, Yahweh Passover from Genesis through Revelation, Fruits from the Tree of Life, the Royal Priesthood, I'm Not Ashamed of the Gospel of Christ, the Holy Ghost Revealed, the True Meaning of Salome, the Persecution of Yahweh ben Yahweh, Volume 1 and Volume 2, and there are other works that he has published that may not be in this book right now that I'm reading from. So just wanted to state some of the works that he has published that are out there. You can, a lot of this information will be shared with you where you can go and get this book here, You're Not a Nigger. You can go to the author's website, which is my website, jeremiahisrael.com. You can go to that website and you can purchase this book here today. And I'm gonna make sure that we add that within our chat. But it's definitely a book that you want to get if you're deep into history, Black history, and you want to know more information about it. This is definitely a book you want to purchase and you want to get and have in your library. All right. So, question, brother, what makes this book, when you think about You're Not a Nigger, the book, what makes this book so special? When you first, what attracted you to this book?
I'm gonna say it. First of all, it was the title. Well, the color and the title, but I'm gonna say the title. And you always give a disclaimer for our show, but we're gonna give another disclaimer on this one just as a clarity because of the title of this book. It was riveting because the title of this book is You Are Not a Nigger. Mm-hmm. And we're gonna talk about this openly on this show because it's very important. And we know that term now is very, I'm not gonna say controversial, I'm gonna say it's a very negative and a controversial subject, especially the way that it was used against a group of people.
Right.
So we as a group of people need to be able to openly talk about it because we were labeled with a very derogatory term by almost a whole nation of people. So it was a very hateful, it was very spiteful, it was meant to be very demeaning. Mm-hmm. And it was literally bred into all of us who were descendants of slaves as being a part of you. Mm-hmm. So now when you get a book that's entitled, You Are Not a Nigger, you can hear it, but it's like, okay, it actually gets into breaking that down and making it a reality, not emotionally, but a reality of you're not a nigger. And what that means, not being a nigger, and what it means when someone has made you into that when you're not.
Right. And I do want to get a little deeper. It's something I want to share. It's a video. It actually came from CNN, and it's just kind of shared the background of that. And before I get into like well, you know what, I like that because that should be the first thing that sticks out to anybody. Especially at the time that it was written.
Yes.
Nowadays, you got this modern sense of how they're trying to redefine it. You find a lot of young people that,
yes.
What's up, my nigga, and all this stuff here.
Right.
They're using that as a different way, a different term. They have reclassified it, in their own minds and sense of how they use it. But when you think about when the author wrote this book and how demeaningful this word was, used in a disparaging way against us as a people, it was offensive,
yes.
To say that and to call us that, and then I want to share this in a sense we're there, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about that. So we'll go to this. I want to share this one clip.
Okay.
There's still niggers in American Army uniforms.
It was said without thinking, painting an entire race with a single word. But it wasn't always a slur. Originally, the Latin Niger just meant black.
Cock-a-doodle-doo, nigger.
But at the dawn of America, Niger became Negar to describe some of the first shipments of African slaves.
What's your name?
Kunta Kinte. My name is Toby.
Hi. That's a good nigger.
And with slavery, the word was contorted into its current, dark, degrading, hateful insult for African Americans.
We are the Ku Klux Klan. We hate niggers. Look out, nigger. The Klan is getting bigger.
Over time, it has appeared in everything from ugly propaganda to cartoons to nursery rhymes. Eeny Meeny didn't always end with catch a tiger by the toe. It was tossed about casually in movies well into the 20th century, part of the way of life, but also sometimes to raise consciousness.
You nigger lover.
And in the civil rights era, the stigma came to a head. Author James Baldwin in the 1963 documentary Take This Hammer.
We have invented the nigger. I didn't invent him. White people invented him.
In the 1970s emerged a new willingness to explore the impact of the word and even satirize it.
And isn't it a lovely morning?
Up yours, nigger.
If you two ever really started going at one another, inside of 5 minutes, he'd be calling you.
Don't say it.
Nigger.
He said
It hardly disappeared in the 1980s and 90s, though white people rarely said the word publicly. Some black people did, a lot.
It's black people, and there's niggers. The niggers have got to go.
Straight out of Compton, crazy named Ice Cube. From the gang called niggas with attitudes.
Cause I never hesitate to put a nigga on his back.
As a society, we've tried to ignore it, ban it, literally bury it.
The NAACP held this symbolic funeral for the N-word.
And we've perhaps added more gravity to the word just by refusing to say it.
Whenever a white lady on CNN with nice hair says the N-word, that's just white people getting away with saying nigger. That's all that is. They found.
So, as we can see, like just talking a little bit about the history of the N-word, and I guess acknowledging that nigger with one G was the intent was mean black, and then they added a G on there to say nigger, which was more, now it became more offensive to us as a people. But even when I look up the definition, like if you look up the definition, like from dictionary.com, the word means a contemptuous term used to refer to a person of any racial or ethnic origin regarded as contemptible, inferior, ignorant, etc. Now, what stands out to me is the word ignorant when you're talking about any person. And I have tended to use the word in a way if I was to use the word, I use it in a way when I see someone act out ignorantly. Like, for instance, we when I turned the news on the scene, what is it, the U.S. Capitol being raided by a group of individuals.
Yes.
I immediately said, look at those niggas.
Exactly.
when I see police officers act out and, shoot or kill an innocent man, don't have no evidence, no proper call, I said, this nigga. So it's, when you think about it from that sense, you use the word, I think, in its proper way, if you're going to use the word, if it's saying that it means ignorant in a sense, so I would use it in turn to reference an ignorant person doing something ignorant. What do you think about that?
And see, because a lot of us remember from a young age, I know our parents would teach us because the term was used negative, they taught us that that's an ignorant person. So you can ignore that, because if someone calls you that, I can understand they're being ignorant, and it was like you just overlook them. That's what back then, because you know that you're not that.
Right.
That was because you're not ignorant. Because if you listen and you succumb to them, then you fall into that category.
Right. And this just goes back to the mindset of the author, to write this book and to say that you're not a nigger, because when you think about it, even when you start to open up the book, and we talk about our true history and just getting into it, we open up the book just a little bit. The first part of this book talks about, lesson number 1. And in lesson number 1, it talks about the blackness of the Bible. But one of the things that stood out, because we're talking about the word nigga, he mentioned in the book, how we'll be called proverbs and bywords.
Yes.
And when you think about it, I think he mentioned, let me go to that one page. He mentioned how we have been called all sorts of bywords and proverbs. And it just reflects on the prophecy of the book itself when it comes to demonstrating who we are as a people. And I know we talked about it. We even went into the prison system talking about this here. You remember
yes.
During Black History Month, y'all, we went into the prison system during Black History Month. We was invited, by the way. And we went in there to share information about this unsung Black leader in our community that has contributed so much to our community and to the people in our community. And people couldn't receive it. Well, I won't say people couldn't receive it. It was a group of people that seemed like they couldn't receive it, right?
Some couldn't receive, a subset of people couldn't receive it.
Of people. and it's amazing how when you can bring information to the forefront and people will reject that information. And I want to share something else, but I want to share it when we go into another part. Matter of fact, I'll share it now a little bit, because it's a scripture I'm going to share a little bit later. And it's Hosea 4:6. And it just talks about how we are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. And the author speaks about this in the book. He shares that actual scripture in the book, how we are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. But he goes on to say something that we're going to get to in a little bit when it talks about, the education of our children. But just reflecting back of being called a nigger, being called a coon, being called
Hicks, Spades. It's a long litany of derogatory terms and bywords that we were used and coined as well as a nigger. Right. And they were all basically synonyms from that.
Right. When you think about it, it just goes into what the author has demonstrated by writing this book and everything that has transpired when it comes to everything that we have went through as a people, and aligning it with the scriptures and what the scriptures say. That's what makes this book so beautiful, because the author goes deep into information that correlates with what has happened to us here in America. And the scripture goes back thousands of years before that time. And he's comparing that, which I think is very, incredible and amazing that he compares that, and he can show the average human, the truth behind what the scriptures say and who those people are that the scriptures are talking about.
Yeah, no, and to that point, see that's what's about You Are Not a Nigger. Like looking at that video, how that term was made negative. And this book was written in the 70s, early 80s. Yet at a time, see, now we, fortunately, because some of us have been pushing this, I like to call it a conscious way of thinking. Now people say woke culture, but a lot of us have been conscious of this long before people who saying woke when y'all was still asleep.
Right.
We were pushing this message and no one was listening, or there were only a few listening, because it was like our history was kind of our history goes back to slavery. And that's what the controversy is about now, that we realize now, most of us, that we have a much richer history. But that term was almost to make us think that our history is a nigger. That's where we come from.
Right.
But You're Not a Nigger. And what was so unique about this book is that first chapter, that our true history from a biblical perspective took you back on a history lesson.
Sure
because for most of us are Bible believing people. And we've been reading the Bible all of our lives, but we never made the history connection in the Bible. And people will say, well, why? Well, most of us, because of slavery, okay, the birth certificates and records, see, our history, we can go back beyond that because they blotted that out.
Right.
See, when you take a child away from their mother at birth and sell them, and then you change their name, their history is gone.
Right.
The thing about Kunta Kinte, what they see when you bring him from his motherland and he has his name, when you give him a slave master's name, and then you take his child away from him and he can't teach him the name of his father and his mother, he has now been made into your nigger. So, and then we weren't allowed to be able to read, even though they gave you the Bible. And what was so unique about this book, the way the author showed, is we were spiritual people and we were given a Bible, but we were given it from a religious perspective where we were subservient to our slave masters. But when we actually learned how to read and we could understand the book, we could see that our history is in that book. But no one had ever showed us that in the book. And I don't want to get off, but like when we went into the prison system and we were invited to do a Black history lesson to members in the prison system, and understand that there are a lot of Black people in the prison system, but there's a lot of white, there's a lot of Hispanic, there's a lot of people. So we had a very diverse audience in that prison system when we were teaching them our true history.
Right.
And we were teaching this from the Bible that everyone reads. And the information, because it was being shared historically from the scriptures, line upon line, it was very enlightening to some in the room to realize that, oh, that's our history in that book. And it tells, like you say, these proverbs and bywords and why that was taking place. And it was very well received. What was unique, it was very well received by most of the Black people in the room, most of the Hispanics in the room, and I'm just calling off what it was, and most of the whites in the room. The only subset of people that had an issue with it was Black people who unfortunately were ignorant and didn't want to look at it from a perspective of, if it calls a spade, it's a spade.
Right.
And they had a problem with the truth, and they look just like us.
Right.
Whereas everyone else was able to look at this and say, wow, that is incredible. That's information that we need to be talked about and be learning. So it was kind of funny and humorous when you talk to your own people, but because when they close their mind to a certain part of the truth, because you've been taught from what the slave master said is, don't go against this.
Right.
Just follow it because we tell you that.
Right.
Even though you can read it for yourself.
Right. And I think you bring up a good point. When we think about some of our unsung Black leaders or heroes in history, the name, like Yahweh Yahweh don't pop up in everybody's household, in everybody's mind. But there are other names too that don't pop up, but that don't mean that there wasn't significant to our culture, our movement, and when we came to the prison system, we was hoping to share some of the works, of Yahweh Yahweh at that time. We actually had a video put together, and maybe one of our shows we may highlight that as well. But we take for granted some of the things that a lot of people have done and have contributed to our culture, and one of the things that I believe this author here has contributed to our culture is the knowledge of who we are. And I know people have talked about this here in the past, but it wasn't as relatable. When I read this book, it's very relatable, coming into the name of God, and knowing, who you are in relationship to God, right. It means nothing. You have to have a relationship. And this book kind of ties that relationship to me, and explains to me who I am, my identity, because here in America, as Black folks, we suffer from the lack of identity. We suffer from an identity crisis because we're trying to keep up with what's going on in society. So we connect with society and what society tells us, and we dismiss information like this here. And I think it's very important, and to our listening audience, by all means, this book, You're Not a Nigger, don't take it as being a negative connotation. It's truly a book that I believe that you need to have in your library. It's information in this book that are important to us as a people moving forward, whether you're white or Black. I think you need to have this information in your library. But just thinking about Black history and the connection, I think, to this book, it's important that we have it, regardless.
Yes, because if we don't tell our story, nobody will.
Right.